The only thing that separates our standard of living versus our great, 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 great grandparents' standard of living is energy. Think about this. Think about a typical morning. Everything you do takes energy. When you rise out of bed, that takes kinetic energy, which is energy of movement. When you make a cup of coffee, that uses electricity. You turn on your light so you can see. You cook eggs, bacon, or whatever breakfast you prefer. That takes energy. It took energy to produce those eggs, that sausage, that food. You get a shower, which takes electricity. You drive in your car, which uses oil. Your workplace has lights, unless you work in a mine or another obscure area, but the majority of places have lights, air conditioning, climate control, heat, which also takes energy. The most important thing in any country is energy. If the electrical grid were to go off for even 3 days, it would have catastrophic consequences for the world. Think about it. People in hospitals that are hooked up to life support, people that are needing emergency surgeries, people would freeze to death in their homes in some parts of the country. I was looking at the weather. That's pretty much the only news I really look at. It's the only part of the news that actually really affects me, the weather. And it said, next Sunday, not this coming Sunday, but the next, it's going to be 1 degree. I'm glad I have energy to heat my home. I don't have to freeze to death that night. It would also interrupt the food supply chain. Most of our food is produced by diesel tractors and then distributed by diesel-powered trucks. UPS would be shut down. People wouldn't be able to get stuff delivered to their businesses. They'd be backed up days and days and days. Yet we don't hear anybody talking about how we can maintain the same standard of living that we currently have while also finding something that doesn't pollute the planet and something that is abundant. What I found interesting when it comes to energy is that energy is a $1.3 trillion industry. That's 5.7% of gross domestic product in the U.S. If you average that out, we have 330 million people. 1.3 trillion would be $3,967 per person per year. Out of the top 10 countries that have the most GDP in the world, 7 of them are in the top 10 of energy consuming, meaning you have to have energy so you can produce products, goods, and services. The only ones that don't, that are in the top 10 GDP, one is the UK. But the UK is 21st in population. Less people means you don't consume as much energy. France, 23rd in population. Italy, 25th in population. But the rest of those countries which have large populations, which produce a large amount of GDP, also need energy because that's how they run their economies. The only one that has renewable resources is Brazil. It has the most water out of any country in the world, 12%. The US only has 4.3%, and China, 6%. The energy source that is used the most globally is coal. It accounts for 35% of all the world's energy. Speaking of which, let's look at some more data. Here are the countries that use the most coal: South Africa, China, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Poland, the Philippines, Japan, Australia, Turkey, South Korea, Ukraine, Malaysia, Germany, Thailand, Russia. 10 of the top 16 developing countries are using coal. What do you expect these countries to do? There's either two options right now. They're extremely poor. You can tell them, stop using coal, it pollutes the planet. U.S. carbon emissions are actually going down. But those countries, those developing countries that use coal, their carbon emissions are skyrocketing. What are you going to tell them? Stop using coal, which means you can't heat your homes during the winter. You can't cool your homes during the summer. You can't use stoves. You can't take showers. They can't build nuclear power plants. A nuclear power plant on average costs $6 to $9 billion, while coal's $1 to $3 billion. And nuclear power, it typically takes over a decade to produce more energy than it takes to build it. That's important too when considering an energy source. Ethanol, you have to use more energy to extract it than you actually get in return. And ethanol actually lowers the amount of strength, BTU, because it waters your tank. Imagine putting water in your gas tank. How stupid is that? And that's what it's like with ethanol. Anytime you put water in it, it lowers the amount. You need something that meets a certain criteria if you're going to use it as an energy source. It has to be abundant, meaning it can't be like solar power because the sun doesn't shine all year. If you were to get solar panels and install them everywhere, it would be very expensive up front, very aesthetically ugly. When those solar panels don't have the sun, like during the winter time, how the hell you expect to use energy? And once those solar panels are no longer useful, you're going to dump them in a landfill somewhere. What about wind power? The problem with wind power is that you have to build dams. When you build dams, it destroys populations. It has a significant impact ecologically. It affects fish populations, river ecosystems, and lands. And sometimes you have to require the displacement of people and entire communities. Most of the water in the U.S. that can be dammed has been dammed. Use that for a pun at your next cocktail party to impress the guest when you're talking about this, because what else would you talk about at a party besides this? While coal is abundant, it also pollutes. Natural gas doesn't pollute as much as coal, and it's also abundant. According on the estimates that I could find, we have enough oil and gas to last us for the next 90 years. You think in 90 years, if we use some of our best scientific minds, if we use our resources, we can start building nuclear power plants. My solution, until there's more data out there, if there's data that disproves everything I said, I'll completely change my opinion. It'd be awesome if we could use hydropower, electric power, or solar power to have our global economy run on that. But you just scientifically can't. The best we can possibly do, everything has pros and cons, is to use natural gas. And I'll get into why natural gas is better than coal and better than wood when it pertains to pollution. Use natural gas and then build and start developing nuclear power plants. And once we have nuclear power plants, atoms are abundant. Atoms make up the earth, they make up matter, they make up you, they make up me. And then we can transition to using nuclear power. It is going to take years, a lot of upfront investment, but we can still sustain our standard of living right now and pollute the planet less than if we use coal. Here's why I stated that natural gas is better for the environment than the other alternatives for now. Wood has 2 carbon atoms for every hydrogen atom, meaning that it has more carbon, which is a pollutant, CO2, than hydrogen. Coal is 1-to-1. Natural gas is 4-to-1, meaning that you have 4 more hydrogen atoms than you do carbon atoms, on average, if you look at the ratio. Nuclear energy, on the other hand, is not a chemical. It's not wood, it's not coal, it's not natural gas. So no hydrogen to carbon ratio. You're not polluting anything. It's not a pollutant. Based on the science and the data, that would be the most efficient way, where you still could sustain a global economy and standard of living, while at the same time, you could also transition to something that's more ecologically friendly. This is just kind of what I've been thinking about recently on my latest intellectual pursuit. Now, the question is, and this will be the last thing I talk about before I conclude, how can we sort of bring attention to this? Well, think about this. I'm not a very political person. I'm not really into politics, but I'm at least familiar with how our system works. The first primary is called the Iowa caucus. You have all these different politicians who have to act like they love ethanol, even though ethanol, it costs more energy to find ethanol. You use a bunch of corn, which could be used to feed livestock. It has water in your engine. It's not economically feasible. And you have to use oil to extract that. But it's political. That's why all these politicians, it doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat, they always brag about how they want ethanol subsidies because they want to get those votes to win. It's kind of like a team in football. They want to win their first game. Yeah, you might lose your first game and you might end up winning the Super Bowl. But it's always good to get that momentum of an opening day win. That's what they want to do because it's a political issue. Well, imagine, because politicians' goals are to get elected. That's all they care about. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. We get all that. I'm not here to ramble about politicians. I don't spend my entire life or day worrying about these dumb SOBs like some of you guys do. If we put pressure on them for nuclear power, they give way more subsidies to hydropower. They give way more subsidies to solar power than they do nuclear power. We must, as a society, transition. Start using natural gas, which has a 4-to-1 hydrogen to carbon ratio compared to 1-to-1 for coal. We have estimated 90 years of reserves, and in that time period, build nuclear power plants. And then we can transition. We can still think about this, you can still take showers, you can still drive SUVs, you can still heat your homes, you can still make coffee, you can still use the light, you can still make YouTube videos, while also not polluting the planet because splitting an atom is not using a chemical.